Welcome to the Becoming Superhuman podcast, where we interview extraordinary people to bring you the skills and strategies to overcome the impossible. And now, here's your host, Jonathan Levy.
Before we get started today, I want to let you guys know that this episode is brought to you by the online course, Creating a Meaningful Life. Now, this course is the culmination of 20 years of work and research by my personal mentor and university professor, Linda Levine, and myself. Now, in it, we teach not only the skills and strategies that we've used and taught and which are being used by life coaches all over the world to create a life of fulfillment and balance, but we also go into how you can design your lifestyle, how you can improve in every aspect, all 8 of the aspects that make a complete and rich life. And really, we share a lot of our wisdom. So if you've been inspired by the show, by some of the guests on here who seem to have these incredibly rich, fulfilling lives, I do encourage you to check it out. And of course, it is backed by a 30-day money-back guarantee. So to take advantage of a special coupon for listeners of this podcast, visit jle.vi/meaning. All right, here we go with the show. Greetings, super friends, and welcome to today's show. In this episode, we are joined by a highly esteemed author and public speaker, a Harvard MBA and former top Walmart executive whose book, entitled The Book of Awesome, has been a New York Times bestseller for 5 years straight. Now, you might have seen his popular TED Talk. It's garnered literally millions of views. You might have read his award-winning blog, 1,000 Awesome Things, which, by the way, ranks among some of the top blogs on the web. Or you might have seen some of his other books. He's published quite a few of them, and most recently published The Happiness Equation, which is a great book on how to rethink your life, your career, your time, your relationships, you name it. So in this episode, I wanted to get behind the science of happiness and simplicity. And I wanted to talk with someone who's devoted his career to exploring that space. I've been someone who's in my earlier life struggled to find happiness, as many of you guys know. So I really wanted to see what his approach was. What did he find different? What did he find similar? In the conversations, we talk about the habits of happiness, the law of attraction, the science of success, life satisfaction, motivation, life transition. We talk about a lot. It's a very broad conversation with a lot of interesting touch points, a lot of brilliant takeaways, and I just know that you're going to find a ton of motivation and inspiration just as I did. So without any further ado, I'm very excited to present to you guys my new super friend, Mr. Neil Pasricha. Neil, welcome to the show, my friend. I am so excited to have you back, and I have to admit, you are my first human interaction since coming back from 10 days in the desert. I'm a little bit bummed to be back at a computer after spending so much time in the sun, so I think it's fitting that I'm going to talk to someone who's an expert in pointing out awesome things and happy things.
Oh, man, I love that. It's like my voice must sound like trumpets blaring to you and the music of the ages and the sounds of the universe somehow, because I'm sure you've all your senses probably are like overly sensitive now. You eat like a piece of cheese. You're like, this is the most incredible piece of cheese I've ever had.
Well, I have to be honest. It was like 10 days of Burning Man-esque desert. So lots of loud music. I'm happy to have like a quiet, calm conversation.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I got your out of office saying that you were at that, and I was like, that's the best out of office ever. Usually it's like, hey, I'm busy. I got my head down. It's like, I'm at Burning Man. You know, I'm great. You kind of like, you're cheering you on. All I was missing was like a picture of you. You're with your bags packed or something, you know?
Awesome, man. So Neil, I have to ask, it seems like you've had an absolutely meteoric rise to the top. We were introduced, you and I, by someone who I respect and look up to very much, Chris Bailey. So I wanted to ask you a little bit, tell me about your journey and how it is that you got to where you are today.
Yeah, sure. I'll give you the quick version. I'm 36 years old, born and raised in the greater Toronto area in Canada, where I live today. Mom from Nairobi, Kenya. Dad from Amritsar, India. They emigrated here in the late 1960s. My dad was a high school physics teacher. My mom was an accountant for General Motors. And I was born with the sort of immigrant sense of wonder. My parents saw snow when I saw snow. They went skiing when I went skiing. They sort of marveled at the world because it was all new to them. My dad, I always tell the story of him like obsessing over the stickers and all the fruits and vegetables, saying, can you believe you can get kiwis from New Zealand? And so I had this like sense of awe and appreciation for life that I think came from my parents, just the classic immigrant sense of wonder. And so very, very normal kind of quiet life, went to undergrad for business, got married, found a job. And all that sort of changed for me in about 2008 when in the span of a really short time, I got divorced, which wasn't my choice, which made it more difficult. And I lost a really close friend to mental illness. He ended up taking his own life. And it was in that swirl and in those months that I started up a blog called 1000awesomethings.com, just as a way to put a smile on my face to cheer myself back up. So I would write about being the first table called up to the dinner buffet at a wedding, or flipping to the cold side of the pillow in the middle of the night, or hitting a string green light when you're late for work. And I would not just write the headline, but I would write, take the time that night to try to cheer myself up and write, 300, 400, 500 words about it. These are the three people that you could get stuck behind at the cash register. That's why it's great when the cashier opens up a new checkout lane. Or not only do we want to revel and enjoy old dangerous playground equipment, like here are the specifically most dangerous like pieces of equipment that used to exist, and that kind of stuff. And then the blog just took off. It got 50 million hits, one best blog in the world a couple years in a row. And that took me to doing a series of books called the Book of Awesome series, Book of Awesome, Even More Awesome, etc., the TED Talk. I'm starting to speak about it. But more importantly, like gratitude and appreciation, and I hope like a sense of wonder that I got from my parents on just how to live life, because we're here a short time. You don't get to come back, and the average person lives 25,000 days. That's like world lifespan in days is 25,000. Mm-hmm. So it's like, to me, going through the divorce and losing a friend, I think led to a multiple year kind of depression. It certainly led to a shorter term one. But the awesome things saved me. They helped pull me out. I pulled myself out, and the community response and the comments and, getting obsessed with things like the Facebook page and the blog stats, like that put me in a different place. So that's really my story. And then the only new sort of addendum to that is that I stopped writing at the end of that blog when I hit 1,000, 4 straight years of writing on Awesome Thing a Night. And I didn't start again till I got remarried. And my wife's name is Leslie, and she's a teacher here in Toronto. And on the flight back home from our honeymoon, which was in Southeast Asia, she went to the airplane bathroom after a layover in Malaysia, and she came back to our seat and said, "I'm pregnant," on the plane, on our honeymoon, on the way home. And so when we landed home in Toronto, I started writing what ended up becoming a 300-page love letter to my unborn child on how to live a happy life, because the thing I wanted most for my child was for them to be happy. Like, it's a very common, everyone wants that for their kids. But because of my experience, with this blog exploding and seeing big CEOs and best-selling authors and speaking to royal families. And by the way, also, I should have mentioned, like, my day job during all of this was 10 years of working inside Walmart, the world's biggest company, as the director of leadership and an assistant to our CEO. So I was seeing kind of executives real close, and I was like, they aren't necessarily happy. Like, there's a lot of unhappiness in these very successful places in the world. But I wanted to give it to my kid. So this 300-page letter was my exploration of happiness in its entirety. And that letter has been published just recently as my new book called The Happiness Equation. That book is the letter I originally wrote to my son before he was born.
Wow. So that's an incredible story. And actually, I didn't hear about the Walmart thing until just now in all my research. So I think that's an interesting compare and contrast between working in one of the largest corporates and seeing so much unhappiness, and then striking out on your own and really pursuing the habit and practice of happiness. Just incredible. So I guess the big question everyone asks you is, are you happy?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And I really pacefully answer that slowly. I just did a Google Talk, and the guy, like, first question, like, are you happy? And I'm like, oh no, this is going to be recorded on YouTube forever. And so I said to him, and I'll say to you now, is that, like, you know what? It's a practice for me. What I mean to say is it's a place to get to mentally, and I get to it, okay? Sometimes on a day like today, when I had a 2-hour walk with my son this morning before I took him to preschool, and I was able to have breakfast with my wife, I get a really stimulating conversation with you, and I know I'm going to go to the gym after. Like, I feel like, yeah, I'm happy. I'm going to pick my son up. Like, there we go. Like, there's some exercise in there. There's some intimacy with my family. There's some stimulation. And I can look back on this day and be like, Yeah, it just felt great to be alive. But of course, like everybody, I have the opposite too. A day where something goes wrong, or my son is upset, or I'm upset. My wife and I have an argument. Something breaks. Something's late. Something's delayed. I don't get something I was going for, or something I've been trying to write doesn't pan out, or I struggle with it. So it's a practice. The difference between me now and before I wrote this book, The Happiness Equation, is like I now know what to do. I will exercise myself from the house and go for a 20-minute run. Or I will simply write 3 emails to old bosses or coworkers saying, hey, I wanted to let you know this tip you gave me in a meeting is something I'm still doing. And like the practice of trying to change my brain into one of gratitude and positivity is more an exercise now that I know how to flip my mental switch, and I can work on happiness like we work on our physical bodies. I can work on my mental body with a little bit more ease. And that practice has helped me get to a place where I'm more happier than I used to be.
Right. So Neil, I think it's actually really interesting what you said. Now I know what to do. I have to admit, recently I've started writing out my secrets of adulthood. It's kind of an idea I got from Gretchen Rubin, who was on the show. And one of them is that almost all bad moods can be solved by music, exercise, sleep, or things you love. So I want to know, what do you do besides, going out for that run? What are your secrets for turning around a bad day or a bad week or a bad month?
Sure. I've got 5 go-to things in my pocket. Okay. Each of them takes 20 minutes. And what I tell anyone is you can develop a new happiness habit yourself. You just do one of these things for 20 minutes. And if you do it for 20 days in a row, that's a new happiness habit. I call it the 20 for 20 challenge. So here's my bag of tricks. Number 1 is a 20-minute walk or run. Okay. So it's a quick physical piece of exercise. We know from research that Michael Babiak and team did, published in the American Psychosomatics Association, that actually can outperform antidepressants or even the combination of taking antidepressants and doing the walking. So a brisk 20-minute walk is like pays off in spades, especially if it's just a change of scenery or something in nature. Second one is 20-minute journaling exercise. This is what I was doing on my blog, 1,000 Awesome Things, every night. It was literally writing about something positive, forcing yourself to do it. Or if someone did something for you, it's just journaling and documenting that moment. I had an incredible night last night. I play on a terrible men's softball team, and for the first time ever, my son got to come see me play. And like, if I were to write about that today, I know it would cheer me up if I hit a rough patch. So the reason that works is because our minds have no GPS signal in them. You don't actually know where you are. When you're journaling about something, you think you're there again. And if you read your own journal, you get a tripling effect. So that's number 2. Number 3 is a conscious act of kindness. This is what I was talking about with writing an email to an old friend or boss or coworker, buying flowers for my wife. Literally sweeping or shoveling the neighbor's sidewalk. If I just do something like nice for someone else, my happiness level goes up. Sonia Lubomirsky at Stanford, University of California, did this research, and she said that if you do 5 of these a week, actually your happiness goes up higher than any of the other exercises. Like it's the dividends are massive. Number 4 is meditation.
Yes.
Yeah, and I know you're a big fan. Like I typically use Headspace. I've been experimenting with other forms, TM and so on, but for me, like a guided meditation on Headspace is just like a pretty quick button push. And Leslie and I, although I have no affiliation with Headspace like particularly, and I know there's lots of alternatives like Calm.com or 10% Happier, we took the plunge and like paid the $3 a month like fee. Like we actually like subscribe to it so that we can, just have access to a few more of the meditations on there. And then number 5 is taking a pen out and a piece of paper and writing down 5 things I'm grateful for. It's a weird thing to like, it sounds strange to be like, excuse me for a moment. And rather than cry in the bathroom, I like, go write down like these 5 things I'm grateful for, but it just works. And this is Emmons and McCullough. They had students write down 5 gratitudes, 5 hassles, or 5 events over 10 weeks. And of course you can, as you know, people who wrote down 5 gratitudes were markedly happier. It's a huge increase in your happiness. So those are my 5 tricks. And you only need to go to one of them. All the studies are mutually exclusive. So you just pick one, say, I'm going to give myself a 20-minute happiness break, and it will readjust your day.
I love that. So why the title Happiness Equation? I mean, if you only need one, it doesn't sound like you need this one plus the other in a certain order. So what is the happiness, quote, equation?
Yeah, it's a great question. So first of all, I shared with you that I had written a letter to my child, right? That's literally what I did. I opened Microsoft Word, like document 1, and I wrote, "Dear baby, I wanted you to have this in case I didn't have a chance to tell you. Love, Dad." Blank page. You know what I mean? That was it. And I gave myself a challenge, which was I have to write 1,000 words as a ticket to go to work in the morning. So, I mean, I just left Walmart about 12 weeks ago. It's fresh for me not to be there, but the whole time I was writing this letter, it was get up at 5 a.m., try to write 1,000 words, and that was my ticket to go to work. It doesn't matter if they're good or bad, never hit backspace, something could be terrible, or research notes, but somehow that just worked. The thing about a letter, though, of course, Jonathan, is letters don't have titles. Like, you don't write a letter to your friend and say, like, the title of this letter is like, X or Y. You just don't do that. So the title of this book became a huge conversation amongst my publishing team for like a year. And it was exhausting. I can't say I would wish that upon anyone. People do judge a book by its cover. And so there was a lot of conversation about, should we call it Truly Rich, or how to be truly rich, or how to find happiness, or a father's guide to his child, and so the happiness equation was one version of a title we tested and experimented with. And it happened to reflect the underlying structure of the book I already had, which was want nothing plus do anything equals have everything. Those 3 segments make up the 9 secrets in the book. And want nothing, which is about contentment, do anything, which is about freedom, and have everything, which is about happiness, are the underpinning of the book. So the equation part kind of grew from there. And so that is the happiness equation, is the subtitle of the book.
So walk me through those 3 pieces in a little more clarity. I think we touched on that kind of very briefly there.
No, I'd love to talk about it in detail. So basically, there is, for lack of better words, like a summer nerd camp or innovation camp that 15 to 17-year-old like high achievers go to in Canada. And I was lucky. I went when I was a kid, and since then I've been guest speaking for it. So I go back every summer and I do a little lecture and I do a Q&A. And when I used to do it years ago, kind of like when I was going through it, I'm 36 now. This is like I'm 17, 18. The questions were very simple, Jonathan. They were like, how do I become a millionaire? How do I get into Harvard? How do I go to Goldman Sachs and become a banker? It was like questions like that. Now when I do these lectures, the questions have totally evolved. And anyone who's listening to this podcast who has 15 to 17-year-old kids, you will relate to the questions. They are things like, how do I have less anxiety? How do I have less stress? How do I find more balance? How do I become a better boyfriend or girlfriend? How do I find more happiness? How do I travel the world but also hold down a job that makes me money? Like, the questions have shifted, I feel strongly, to a place where people are actually looking for contentment, they're looking for freedom, and they're looking for happiness. And certainly, Harvard exit surveys confirm this. They show that students want happiness more than wealth for the first time ever.
Wow.
And the proof point on this is go to Google and you type how to be, just like those 3 words, how to be. And the drop downs are happy, then rich, then pretty, and then real estate agent. I don't know why those are the ordered 4 things, but they are. Briefly, How to Be Signal has popped to the top because there's a movie with that title, but it literally have a screenshot. It's just how to be happy is what we want more than anything else. And Google Trends, you can kind of look at it. So it's like, we want this thing, happiness, more than anything else, but we haven't got there. And so for me, the secrets I espouse in the book, and we can get into them a bit later, but they are things about being happy first, investing your happiness, doing things for you, which is valuing intrinsic motivators, remembering the lottery, which is about appreciation, never retiring, which is always having a purpose. As I go through them and I pull them out, it is that model. It is want nothing, okay? Contentment, to be comfortable with what you have. There's a famous Epictetus quote about the richest man in the world is the one that has the most, but who wants the least. Then do anything. True freedom. You have it. I feel like I have it, or I'm working towards it. And that's what I'm hearing people want. They want to overvalue themselves. They want to create space in their lives. They want to, be flexible on their work and their time and their relationships. That's space. That's freedom. And finally, they want happiness. And that's the last segment of the book. So that equation isn't, it's not some PhD sort of like, I haven't done a treatise on trying to figure out the mathematical underpinning of happiness. I've just surmised my own view of what value systems we have today. And here's how to get to those places based on all my research, my experiences, and what I wanted to give to my child in terms of if anything happens to me, he can read this book and it should have everything I've learned in it.
Incredible. And I agree with so many of your kind of touch points there. Definitely the idea of wanting less, of lowering these kinds of expectations of acceptance, of presence in your own life, I think is and was the hugest step in my own personal happiness. And just this idea, I love to tell people that freedom is the new currency, because I know so many MBAs who turn down the $250,000 a year job to have the freedom to live wherever they want for, half that. And I think our generation and generations to follow are going to heavily weigh freedom, mobility, lifestyle, and things of that nature far over money, because we've kind of learned that money seems like a tool that can buy freedom, but in reality, it kind of can't. It can buy freedom at a certain point, far along the bell curve. But, if it's going to work 120 hours a week to make that money, there's no way to exercise it towards freedom.
Exactly. And I mean, I just got back from the grocery store this morning with prints on all the covers of the newspapers and on the big magazines. And of course, headlines say, what will happen to his $250 million estate or whatever? And it's like, it reminded me as I looked at those magazines this morning of an old adage my dad used to say, the Indian immigrant to Canada with $8 in his pocket. He used to always tell me, you only made what you spent and enjoyed. That was his phrase. You only made what you spent and enjoyed. Like if you die with money in the bank, like you wasted something. You either wasted that money or you wasted the time spent earning it, because you only made what you spent and enjoyed. And so when I saw the $250 million, I'm like, I hope nowhere in his life, and I don't 12,000 degrees removed from him, I hope nowhere in his life he didn't sacrifice an hour with a child or a friend in honor of making an extra buck, because he didn't use it all, right? And none of us do. So how do you end the race with the wheels falling off the car so that, you time it perfectly? I'm really intrigued right now, Jonathan, and like these annuity things, just like, oh, this can pay me this much money for a year, and I just have to trade up this, and that. Cool. Then I can build in freedom backwards. So I don't know. There's a lot of ways to think about it.
Totally. I think Tim Ferriss has done a lot in that regard. Like your dream life really only costs X $1,000s a month. So set it up so you make that for the rest of your life, and don't worry about stockpiling $5 or $10 million so that you can then go do what you want. And that's essentially been my model for the last 5 or so years, is just set the monthly income enough so that you don't have to work too much. You don't have to do things you don't want to do. You don't have to sacrifice your soul to a job you hate, which I think is a huge component of happiness. Are you passionate about the way you spend your days?
Exactly. And the other thing is, you course correct. You figure things out. Like if you are kind of wise enough to listen to Jonathan's podcast, then that if you cut down your hours at a job you don't like, somehow a safety net will appear. Somehow you will have peanut butter sandwiches twice a month instead of once. Like things will just kind of curve into the lifestyle you desire. And I'm one to talk because I'm hypocritical on this. My book blew up in 2010. Okay, that means I got a 6-figure book advance and the speaking circuit lit up and all that stuff. 2010. I didn't quit my job at Walmart till 2016. Okay, why did I wait 6 years when I had, by the way, other books over that time that were all making money? It's because I grew up with immigrants, and like they said to me, like, work hard and then you'll have a big success and then you'll be happy. They told me that model. They said, right, study hard, you get good grades, you become a doctor. Right. And it wasn't until I realized through writing this letter for my child that the model's actually flipped. In fact, it's the opposite. It's be happy first, then you do great work, and then you have the big success. And so it was only because I realized, okay, happiness is an investment at the beginning. Right. It's not something you get to at the end. And that afforded me the ability to sort of like pull and tease myself away from a full-time job, which I enjoyed. It wasn't a negative thing for me. I really liked it. Actually, it's hard to leave. But I pulled away from it because now I'm like, the creative freedom is something I couldn't have paid for before. I didn't have the space to like write whatever I wanted in the morning till whatever time I wanted to at night. Like that's like, I couldn't have built that in. And that's something I'm trying to experiment more with now.
That's brilliant. I really love that message. I think that's a huge takeaway, for anyone looking to kind of, quote, do their own thing. I know you're a Harvard MBA, so you've heard MBAs talk about entrepreneurship, and it's never start a company. It's do my own thing. This kind of evasive, like I'm going to do my own thing after the MBA, which is just beautifully non-committal. Neil, I wanted to ask you, as you said, your book blew up in 2010, your blog blew up. All this was just kind of like took the web by storm. What do you think is the secret to your success? I mean, what made you go viral really with all your projects, despite the fact that you were working on it only part-time?
Well, I, for a long time, really looked up to a newspaper called The Onion, theonion.com, right? Like it's this satirical rag from University of Wisconsin, I think it is. And I remember reading an interview with the editor, I think Todd Hansen, in like one of those comedy writing kind of interview books, like probably sells 12 copies, but like someone like me buys it because I'm interested in what all these funny people have to say. And someone asked him, how do you make money writing jokes? Like, I'm funny and I want to write jokes. How do I get paid for that? And his answer is the answer I'll give you, which is do it for free for 10 years first. Like, it was literally that. He's like, I just did it for free for 10 years first. It wasn't because I was trying to make money. I just enjoyed it. And for me, yeah, it just blew up. But if I look back, and I've heard, by the way, Tim Urban say the same thing on who's, waitbutwhy.com.
Right.
He's like, I had a blog for 10 years and I wrote 300 blog posts that no one's ever read. Then Wait But Why blew up. Me, it's editor of my high school newspaper, editor of my university newspaper, which is, 4 years there, 4 years there. Written other blogs, turning to writing as a place for me. Like it was, for me, when I get under stress, when the marital problems happen, and when things like that happen, my instinct isn't to turn to racquetball, or to running, which some people's is, and that's amazing. My instinct is to turn to Microsoft Word and like just start writing about my feeling, like I must have had like a good poetry class when I was 6 or something like that, because that's where I turn. And so the fact that the blog took off may have been partly just that I had worked a lot of kinks out of my writing system, and it was a place that was comfortable for me. And then, the usual luck, chance, randomness, the black swan event of Fark.com picking up my 20th post, probably right when I would have quit the blog. And then, of course, that one went viral, which is Old Dangerous Playground Equipment. That one went viral and got me 50,000 hits. So then I was like, well, I can't disappoint the 50,000 people here tomorrow. So after my energy level abated for another month, then I went to the front page of Reddit on another post. I was like, well, I can't let. So like, who knows what the randomness kind of cycle is? But I will say, just doing something you love for a real long time consistently, just because you love it, that might explode later just because you're so good at it after that.
Right. I thought of a couple different quotes while you were speaking. One being, very commonly attributed quote to like 100 different people, the old adage that it took me 20 years to become an overnight success.
Yeah.
And then with kind of your story of just the right timing, it reminded me really of the quote from Paulo Coelho in The Alchemist, where when you really want something, all the universe conspires in helping you to achieve it. I'm a huge believer in the law of attraction, and that if you line up your intentions, you put in the work, something magical happens in kind of the fabric of reality to make things happen in just the right order at just the right time. And almost everyone we've talked to on the show is like, I wasn't going to make it to that one match, and then suddenly somehow,
I totally agree with that too. And I've heard that same quote attributed to Ralph Waldo Emerson, like a version of that. And I like to believe it too, because it feels good, to be like, when I'm rolling, things will roll with me. Right. Or when like my favorite hitter in baseball is hitting a hot streak, he's on fire, we believe in that. But then I wrestle with that because, I saw a tweet that's, gets spun around the web recently, and it says, here's the tweet. I'll try to quote it. Why do birds suddenly appear whenever you are narrative fallacy? Or confirmation bias. Like, it's like, yeah, there's that, the law of attraction, as you say, and like the things kind of happen when you need them to. At the same time, maybe you're only talking to outliers on your podcast.
Right.
And the outliers, like whoever you're interviewing, you mentioned Gretchen Rubin, and I listened to your podcast on Jen Sincero, and I'm like, maybe they're just random freak luckiness. And the lessons are, just a simple basic, do what you love, try really hard. If it happens, great. If it doesn't, quit, try something new, and follow the Nassim Taleb advice, which is make yourself open for black swan events. Like, if the world really is as random as we think and as chaotic, then just trying 10 new things, maybe one will work. And if they don't, try 10 new things and maybe one will work. The Scott Adams principle, the guy who wrote Dilbert, saying, I only did Dilbert because I was looking for a way to make money. And like, I failed at vacuum salesman, and I failed at he named like 12 other jobs he tried before cartoonist. And it's like, wow, who knew if he was a good vacuum cleaner salesman, he would have made like $100,000 a year off that and been like the best vacuum cleaner salesman. But like, Dan Dilbert blew up, and
Yeah.
I'm messy in my response to you because I'm messy mentally on like trying to balance those two thoughts,
Sure. I definitely think, I talk about it a lot with friends who are in transition and in a free online course I just made about entrepreneurship where, 1 in 10 startups or business ideas fail. So the fastest way to success, try 10 business ideas. Like statistically, you will succeed. And if you try 20, you're almost guaranteed to succeed, right?
Yeah.
The numbers and statistics don't lie. And I think also you learn something from every subsequent failure. So when people ask me what's the secret to success in business, I say just try a lot of stuff and don't be concerned about failing. Fail smart, fail effectively, fail in an educational manner. So I definitely agree with you there. The law of attraction is not going to make you succeed every time by any means.
I love that advice because I totally agree with you that the number of successes you have is somewhat correlated to the number of failures. So if you just simply double your rate of failure, you will probably double your rate of success. It might not be then doubling your successes, but your rate of success will go up certainly.
Absolutely. So Neil, tell me a little bit about your inspiration, your motivation right now. What's really driving you? Now you don't have a manager, you don't have a boss, you don't have to be at work every day. This is a problem that I sometimes struggle with. What thoughts or what ideas motivate you every day to get out of bed, to do this interview, to write more?
I appreciate you asking because I'm wrestling with this right now. And so I quit Walmart in February. And I'd been there 10 years with a structured environment with what I call the 4 S's of a good job. Okay, these are what everybody needs. You need social, people, friends, someone to go running with at lunch, the 5 people you work around that sort of make you laugh. And you need that social fulfillment. We're the most social mammals on the planet for a reason. You need structure. In a 168-hour week, you need the 56-hour work bucket to sort of justify, pay for, and create the other 2 buckets, one of which is sleep and one of which is question mark, whatever you like. But you need some structure. Third is stimulation, which is a steep learning curve, always learning something new and being stimulated. And fourth is story, which is being part of something bigger than yourself. If you work at Google, you're organizing the world's information. Or if you're at Wikipedia, you are giving the sum of human knowledge away for free. If you're at Walmart, you are lowering the cost of living around the world, right? You are part of something that you could not do by yourself, okay?
Right.
Now that I've quit that job, I've given away the 4 S's and I believe in those 4 S's. So now I want to build that back. And so my instinct right away, Jonathan, was reach out to executive coaches, reach out to, personal therapists, physical fitness coaches, and try to get my life all structured around adding back in measurements and managements and systems as you're asking me. But instead, after a month or two of kind of going around in that, I've actually totally rejected that entire mentality. And I'm now following a new line of thinking. And here I can summarize that new line of thinking in 1 sentence. And the sentence is this: the longer you hold your breath underwater, the more interesting place you come up. And I feel like I'm underwater purposely, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, writing wise. What do I want to write next? I've got 1,200 ideas. What do I want to speak about next? Or is it speaking I'm wrestling all that. So I leave it open-ended. And the longer I can hold my breath in this underwater state, the more interesting place I will eventually come up. And so when am I coming up? I've decided September 1st. I'll revisit myself. I'll check in. I've actually made an appointment with an executive coach for a few meetings in September, purposely September, so that I can have the remainder of June, July, and August to stay underwater and to experiment and explore. That means lots of time in bookstores. That means lots of browser tabs open till 2 a.m. That means playing with my kids and following natural passions. That means trying to sift away all the kind of presuppositions I have on top of my own thoughts. It's my assumptions, my ideals, my background, my successes, which often can get very much in the way of future successes, as you know. So then clear the deck so that in September I can recheck in and then follow another passion project, whatever that may be.
Brilliant. I really respect you being completely candid with us. You are a happiness expert. It would be very easy for you to say, well, I'm just so happy and I'm spending so much time with my kid and, I'm not working. But I think it takes a lot of kind of moxie to be like, well, I don't really know. I don't know if this is going to be the right thing for me. I'm going to check in and I'm pretty uncertain right now. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah. The trick is there's many different uncertain and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm way too uncertain. And I feel like I quickly need to make a little temperature chart in my basement of how many X or Y or Z I'm doing a year, But instead, the mantra of the longer you hold your breath underwater, the more interesting place you come up can become, in a healthy day, a bit of a resolve to then just do whatever I want and test my natural affinity towards it. Because of course, the truth of the matter is I'm not going to be successful anyway if I don't have a natural affinity towards it. It's just about finding that next thing and doing that every few years or a few months or whenever you're able to like kind of cock and kind of throw again, you know? And right now, quitting a full-time job I've had for 10 years is a good opportunity to like look around my world again and figure out where I want it to be.
I love that, you know, and I'm going through a kind of similar thing where we're in a bit of a transition period with the courses and how much is the podcast going to take up of my time and how much do I want to speak? You know, that resonated with me as well. A thought that really helps me is, in my life at least, I've noticed that even the most successful ventures, business ideas and whatever only keep me happy and only keep me fed, you know, at the level that I want to be fed for about 7 years at best. So I say to myself, well, if this whole thing, you know, goes to shit after 3 or 4 years that I've been doing it, well, it's not that far off from when it was inevitably probably going to end at 7 years. Like, what's another 2 or 3 years early to pivot into something new? And I kind of look at phases in my life in that regard. I ran my last company for 7 years, had a little bit of a transitionary period. Before that, I was trying all these different ideas. I was a student for 7 years. So I think of it that way. Like, it's very hard to look at any career, no matter how successful, as like, this is what I'm going to do till the day I die. I don't think anyone in our generation actually thinks that way.
That is so interesting you say that for so many reasons. I totally am like smiling listening to you because I've heard, and these are anecdotal, but I've heard from someone senior in the speaking industry who says the average speaking career is 7 years. Maybe it was 6, but like around that time. And then I've heard from someone in the publishing industry, someone say the average successful writing career is about 7 years. That means there's many that don't make it to 1 year, but like if you know someone has a big book or two, like it's about 7 years that they kind of like nail it, you know? And then the tripling is there's a famous TED talk where a designer, and I'm blanking on his name, preaches this whole 7 years on, 1 year off principle. To do nothing for a year in between the sort of 7 successful years to then reshift your thinking or come back with a new idea. Stefan Stagermeister. I'm like blanking on the name. I'm sorry. We can Google it. But then that's all led me to doing a test with a company right now. And I'm in the middle of this test, so I can't comment on the research findings yet. But we're doing a test right now inside this company to say, what happens if you work 7 weeks on and then forcibly don't work for 1 week? Like, take that 7 and 1 model in the year timeline that you've talked about and that this TED Talk talks about, and actually distill it down to a more micro 7 weeks on, 1 week off. And I'm doing this test in a company that already had the very progressive unlimited vacation policy that like companies like Facebook and so on have, where you can take as much vacation as you want anytime you want it. But that wasn't working for this company. And I don't comment on the details yet because we're still studying it. That wasn't working for this company because like people kind of didn't take much vacation. And when they did, they kind of felt like they needed to check in, right? Like they kind of like, they still feel the stress of work. It's like not cool to just disappear for the whole summer, right? You can't just do that. So we're doing this test and it's early days, but we're already finding is when you actually take someone's computer and their iPhone and all that stuff, they have no way to contact the office for 1 full week and then they come back. The energy level is at a different scale. People are coming back with new ideas. They're like, hey, I actually thought this form we use should be totally different while I was away because I like, you know, I saw a bird flying and it reminded me of something, you know, like whatever it was. And so far we're testing productivity before and after, creativity before and after, all that stuff, self-reported health, all that is showing that it's massive. And then it's funny to me because I'm like 7 weeks on, 1 week off. That sounds like France. Like it sounds kind of like some certain European countries already do. So anyway, your 7 year thing like really hits a nerve with me for many reasons. Yeah,
I think it's the classic 7 year itch. My great uncle, who in many ways was like a grandfather to me, always told me, you know, there's never been anything I enjoyed doing enough to do it more than 7 years. And it really resonated and it's been definitely true for me for most of my life, adult and otherwise. So, Neil, I want to ask you, besides our common mutual friend, I guess, Chris Bailey, who I have to thank, by the way, for introducing us, what other books or thought leaders are you a big fan of?
Oh my gosh, so many. I couldn't sleep as a child, and there was no internet or cell phones. So I used to just bury myself in the books. And I'm lucky and unlucky to live around the corner from a downtown Toronto, like giant bookstore that's open till midnight every night. So I oftentimes the 20-minute walks just end up me surfing different things. So here's what I'm reading right now. I'm reading When Breath Becomes Air, which is, for those that don't know, a doctor in the U.S. who became a cancer doctor and then sadly found out he had cancer and died. And between the time he found out and the months he actually died, he wrote a memoir with his view of life. So I'm reading that right now, and it's gorgeous and stunning and beautiful. I'm reading The Black Swan, as I was mentioning, Nassim Taleb. I'm reading Black Swan Green, fiction, David Mitchell. David Mitchell's fiction blows my mind. He's the guy that wrote Cloud Atlas and similar books. It's just the writing, the place you go mentally within his books is like, I can't even describe the feeling. It just blows me away. And it's like the kind of book I'm reading where I'm like, I can't believe I've written a book and this guy's written a book, because this book is like 10,000 times better than anything I could ever do. You know, like all we have in common is the glue that sticks the pages together. Like it's like blows me away when you read another writer like that quality. I'm reading a book on parenting, which I'm really loving, called How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk. It's illustrated with cartoons. It's been out since the 80s and sold millions of copies. But like as a new dad, it's very, very healthy and helping me with all kinds of ways to like not say no and like encourage motivation, not praise, and like never say good job, but always say like, oh, you're putting blocks on top of each other. You're trying really hard. Like comment on the effort, not the result. Like I'm just learning stuff that's like, yeah, exactly. Brilliant. So these are a few examples, but I'm the guy with like 17 browser tabs open at all times, just soaking in whatever newspaper clipping, magazine article, or shampoo bottle I can read. I just love ingesting stuff.
Brilliant. Let me ask you another kind of tough, tricky question. What's one thing that you regularly do that you think other people might find to be crazy?
Oh my gosh. I stole this note card system idea from Ryan Holiday. I've been talking about it a lot lately. And so let me just describe it real quickly. I think people will find this a little bit weird, but like in my wallet at all times are tiny little cue cards, little yellow cue cards. And I put them sideways so they fit in my wallet, like with the billfold, you don't even notice them. And they're in all kinds of other places. They're in my bedside table, they're in my car, and I keep a certain pen, which has, 0.5 millimeter point, like a really thin pen. That's a V5 tech point for any pen freaks like me. And anytime I get an idea, anytime I make a connection, anytime I hear a quote I like, anytime I feel I see a magazine clipping that I want to rip a little quote out of, I grab it, I stick it to that card, I write it on the card, and slowly, like a game of Plinko on Price is Right, like the cards sort of collect in like the basement of my house on a table in this little box. And then what I do is anytime I'm going on like a long plane ride, I grab a stack of those cards and the box itself that holds them, and I will sift them, sort them, and review them. Chuck out the ones that are garbage, because many of them are in retrospect, then say like, these 7 together have a theme that I didn't notice yet, and maybe that's a new article or a new book. Or, hey, these are all about parenting, and like I let that organically evolve. And so like I have one called Keynote Speech, and so like, oh, that's an idea for a speech, or like I could do that in my speech. Or I have one called like Next Book ? Or I have one called Parenting. Like, but the contents themselves and the sort of subject titles naturally evolve from everything I'm collecting from everywhere.
Brilliant.
Yeah. And then I've got this, little shoebox thing, the box that holds all the cards. And this, like, it's wrapped in rubber bands. I'd run out of the house with it first if my house was on fire, because it's basically a brain dump of everything I've been thinking about or seeing for the last couple of years. And so I copied that idea from Ryan Holiday. You could Google Ryan Holiday note card system to see it. He, I think, very graciously credits, I can't remember which former U.S. president that used to do this, a similar nutcase as I guess the rest of us. And it's totally changed my life, because you know what? It's relieved me of the worry that I'll forget something. That's why I don't ever carry around the thought that like, I better write that down. I just do. And then it's put away, Yeah,
it reminds me a lot of the Getting Things Done system. We had David Allen, and he was talking about, any capture system works. It doesn't have to be a fancy app, but it has to be accessible, has to always be with you, because if genius strikes, you don't want to lose out on it.
I mean, the worst thing I do is in my bedside table, like run out of cards and have no pen. And then like 2 a.m., I'm like, I got to like run to the basement. And like, it just wakes me, then it's like chaos. Yeah. You need that. Yeah. The system must always be replenished.
Absolutely. Neil, I have 2 more questions for you. Second to last one being, if people want to learn more about you, check out your work, stuff like that, where would you like us to link them in the blog post?
Sure. Simple place is just globalhappiness.org. It's the Institute for Global Happiness. I'm the director. It's got everything there. It's got free resources you can download. Like I mentioned the 20 for 20 challenge. You can download the free slides and facilitator's guide and everything's there. Like we just put it all away. Anything about my books, all that stuff, articles you can read, articles I love, globalhappiness.org. It's kind of like just my home base.
Oh, wow. So we didn't even talk about that. I didn't even realize you were the director of a nonprofit. What does Global Happiness do? What's their mission?
Our mission is to increase happiness in organizations because it turns out that the place that we spend the most time is also the place we are the unhappiest.
Right.
This is Professor Matt Killingsworth's work at Harvard. And he did this like incredible graph showing all the places we spend time on a happiness chart where he tracks people, 15,000 people using cell phones for across 150 countries.
Oh yeah, I remember this.
There's this giant pink circle on the like upper left of the graph and it's like work. And then everything else, listening to music, walking my dog, having sex, cooking, they're all tiny little circles on the right side of the graph.
Wow.
It's like we like all that stuff, but we don't spend time doing it. And we don't like work collectively, but it's the place where we are spending a disproportionately large portion of our time. We do that more than anything. And I spent 10 years inside the world's biggest company running leadership development. So for me, I think my special sauce – it sounds disgusting, but my like thing that I'm working on is like happiness inside organizations. Like how do you get to be happier when you're inside a big, gigantic bureaucratic company? And what does that look like? What can a big company do to make their lives of their employees happier? And what does happiness look like on a minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day basis? Like how do we make that come to life a little better in, cubicle farms? Like where does that all come together? And that's where the free resource is. And, you can go check out the website, but that's where we're coming from. And it's a work in progress. We're figuring that out as we go along.
Brilliant. Sounds like an incredible mission and something definitely to be passionate about and be excited about working on. Neil, I want to ask you the last and possibly toughest question before we close, which is if people take away, we've shared so much wisdom, you've shared especially so much wisdom on this episode. If people tend to forget a lot of it and remember just one very, very important point, one takeaway, what do you hope for that to be?
Remember the lottery. Those 3 words. Remember the lottery. You've already won. There are 110 billion people who have ever lived. Okay. If you're listening to this, you're one of the 7 billion people alive today. That's a 1 in 15 lottery that you already won. And you don't even realize you won it because we hardly ever think about the 110 billion people who came kind of before us. Of the 7 billion people, ask yourself, what country do I live on? What country do I live in? You and I are in different countries right now. But like your listeners, where are you? Are you in a place where you trust the water that comes out of your taps? You feel safe coming out your front door. You can marry who you like and live where you please. Like if you are lucky enough to have those freedoms, you're in the top 5%. Like there's just not any places you can have all those things. And I would wager that most of your listeners do have most of those freedoms. Then if you go a step further, you're like, well, the average world income is $5,000. Okay. And half the world is unemployed. Okay. Then the number of people in the world that have post-secondary education is 7%. If you're lucky to have any post-secondary education, you're in the top 7% of that. Wow. So my point is like, remember the lottery. If I could just summarize like one life view, and you gave me the opportunity here in the last question, it's like you already won. Like you already have it pretty good. Be appreciative for what you have and like keep moving forward to make the world a better place.
Brilliant. That's a fantastic note to end on. Neil, it's been such a pleasure chatting with you today. We're going to link all the resources and books and everything that you mentioned in the podcast. I want to thank you so much for spending your time. I'm really glad Chris connected us, and it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks, Jonathan. Absolutely the same to you and your listeners. Thanks so much for having me on. If anyone's here, I always think there's this community around the world of end of podcast people. Like I'm in that group. So for those here that are listening to us here and want to connect further, I'm just Neil, Neil, at globalhappiness.org. It's always intriguing to me to hear from someone on the other side of the world who's like, I listened to you from New Zealand in a sheep farm, whatever. Neil at globalhappiness.org. I'd love to talk to anyone anytime.
Love it. All right, Neil, let's do keep in touch. And, I look forward to sharing the episode with the world.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Take care.
All right, super friends, that's it for this week's episode. We hope you really, really enjoyed it and learned a ton of applicable stuff that can help you go out there and overcome the impossible. If so, please do us a favor and leave us a review on iTunes or Stitcher or however you found this podcast. In addition to that, we are always looking for great guest posts on the blog or awesome guests right here on the podcast. So if you know somebody or you are somebody or you have thought of somebody who would be a great fit for the show or for our blog, please reach out to us either on Twitter or by email. Our email is info@becomingasuperhuman.com. Thanks so much.
Thanks for tuning in to the Becoming Superhuman podcast. For more great skills and strategies, or for links to any of the resources mentioned in this episode, visit www.becomingasuperhuman.com/podcast. We'll see you next time.